Small frosted Arctic ibex. Tiny frosted Arctic glacier lynx.
Large gray polar snow leopard.
Small silver Arctic muskox. Small silver Arctic ice weasel. Giant snowy Arctic muskox. Small white Arctic wolverine. Small snowy polar marmot. Small snowy polar bison. Medium snowy polar snow leopard. Giant gray polar snow marten. Giant icy Arctic muskox. Giant frosted Arctic pika. Large snowy polar glacier lynx. Tiny white polar glacier lynx. Giant gray Arctic pika. Medium snowy Arctic marmot. Small gray polar wolverine. Giant white polar Arctic hare. Medium snowy polar bison. Medium snowy Arctic moose. Small gray polar Arctic wolf. Tiny white Arctic yak. Giant snowy Arctic polar bear. Medium snowy polar caribou. Large silver Arctic glacier lynx. Medium gray Arctic fox.
Medium gray Arctic polar bear.
Large snowy Arctic snow marten. Giant gray Arctic hare. Small white Arctic glacier lynx. Small snowy polar bison. Large white polar reindeer.
Tiny snowy Arctic fox.
Large silver Arctic polar bear.
Giant icy Arctic glacier lynx. Medium white Arctic glacier lynx.
Giant snowy polar musk ox. Giant silver Arctic polar bison. Large white polar caribou.
Large snowy Arctic moose.
Medium white Arctic moose.
Giant icy Arctic muskox.
Medium gray Arctic moose.
Giant snowy polar bear.
Tiny silver Arctic glacier lynx.
Large white polar lemming.
Giant snowy Arctic glacier lynx.
Large silver Arctic reindeer. Large white polar lemming.
Tiny icy Arctic mountain goat.
Small gray polar snow marten.
Small gray polar Arctic hare. Tiny silver Arctic snow leopard. Giant snowy Arctic ice weasel.
Tiny, icy Arctic pika.
Small snowy Arctic marmot.
Tiny snowy Arc wolverine.
Small white Arctic pika.
Large snowy Arctic fox.
Small snowy Arctic ibex.
Tiny white Arctic ibex. Giant gray Arctic snow marten.
Medium snowy polar pika.
Giant gray Arctic snow marten. Tiny snowy Arctic wolverine.
Giant frosted Arctic ibex.
Medium white Arctic musk ox. Tiny silver Arctic wolverine. Tiny silver Arctic moose.
Tiny, icy Arctic glacier lynx.
Small snowy Arctic yak.
Tiny frosted Arctic pika.
Giant icy Arctic yak. Giant snowy Arctic snow leopard. Medium white Arctic glacier lynx.
Medium silver Arctic snow leopard.
Medium gray Arctic polar bison.
Small white Arctic yak.
Tiny frosted Arctic moose.
Tiny silver Arctic musk ox. Giant white polar lemming.
Medium white polar wolverine.
Tine silver polar Arctic wolf. Medium white polar ibex. Large silver Arctic pika. Giant gray polar snow martin.
Giant snowy Arctic polar bison.
Medium white polar reindeer.
Tiny silver polar Arctic wolf.
Large gray polar yak.
Tiny white polar marmot.
Small silver.
Large white polar pika.
Small white Arctic hare.
Medium snowy polar snow martin.
Large white polar caribou. Tiny silver Arctic snow leopard. Medium white Arctic hare. Medium snowy Arctic wolf. Giant silver Arctic reindeer. Giant gray polar caribou.
Giant frosted Arctic wolf.
Small silver Arctic snow martin. Small snowy Arctic reindeer. Large white Arctic glacier lynx.
Tiny gray Arctic yak.
Giant snowy polar Arctic fox. Large silver Arctic wolf. Giant silver Arctic lemming. Medium snowy Arctic lemming. Giant snowy polar Arctic wolf.
Small frosted Arctic wolverine.
Small silver Arctic lemming.
Giant snowy Arctic ibex. Large snowy Arctic polar bison.
Medium silver Arctic ibex. Medium snowy Arctic caribou.
White polar Arctic fox.
Tiny snowy polar wolverine.
Giant gray polar musk ox. Large gray polar bison.
Medium gray polar bear.
Large snowy polar reindeer.
Large snowy polar Arctic wolf.
Tiny gray Arctic tiki.
Medium snowy polar reindeer. Medium white Arctic snow leopard. Giant white polar bear.
Giant frosted Arctic polar bear.
Tiny silver polar snow leopard.
Giant snowy polar caribou. Giant frosted Arctic musk ox. Giant white polar glacier lynx.
Medium snowy Arctic ice weasel.
Giant snowy polar Arctic moose.
Giant gray Arctic
Small white Arctic arc moose. Large gray Arctic wolf.
Medium gray polar glacier lynx.
Large silver Arctic polar bear.
Medium snowy polar Arctic fox. Tiny silver Arctic polar bear. Large gray polar Arctic wolf.
Giant frosted Arctic snow leopard.
Large gray polar snow martin.
Tiny silver polar snow martin.
Small white Arctic polar bear. Small snowy Poland marmot.
Giant icy Arctic ibex. Tiny icy Arctic ibex.
Tiny frosted Arctic glacier lynx.
Medium snowy polar reindeer.
Large gray polar bison.
Medium white polar Arctic fox.
Medium white polar bison. Giant gray polar pika.
Large icy Arctic snow leopard.
Tiny gray Arctic marmot. Giant white polar wolverine.
Small white Arctic hare.
Giant snowy polar glacier lynx. Giant silver Arctic wolverine.
Large snowy polar glacier lynx. Small gray polar marmot. Tiny snowy Arctic polar bear.
Small snowy Arctic polar bear. Large white polar pika. Large gray polar caribou. Small gray polar snow martin. Tiny silver polar bison.
Small snowy polar mountain goat.
Large white polar reindeer.
Medium snowy polar musk ox.
Tiny silver Arctic wolverine.
Medium snowy polar mountain goat.
Large snowy Arctic marmot.
Small snowy Arctic reindeer. Tiny silver Arctic lemming.
Giant snowy polar bear. Giant frosted Arctic reindeer. Medium silver Arctic snow leopard.
Tiny white Arctic reindeer.
Giant icy Arctic muskox.
Small gray polar Arctic fox.
Large silver Arctic reindeer. Medium white Arctic moose. Medium white polar bison.
Medium snowy polar wolverine. Medium snowy polar ice weasel. Small silver polar wolverine.
Large, snowy Arctic snow martin.
Small silver Arctic ibex.
Small white Arctic snow martin.
Large snowy polar Arctic fox. Giant gray polar yak. Medium white Arctic polar bison.
Tiny icy Arctic mountain goat.
Large snowy Arctic musk ox. Giant silver Arctic snow leopard. Giant icy Arctic ibex.
Tiny silver Arctic musk ox.
Giant snowy Arctic ice weasel. Giant icy Arctic glacier lynx. Giant silver Arctic polar bear. Medium snowy polar bear. Giant gray polar snow leopard.
Tiny white Arctic hare.
Giant silver Arctic reindeer. Medium gray polar bear.
Small silver Arctic polar bear.
Medium snowy Arctic moose. Giant icy Arctic caribou. Small snowy Arctic wolverine. Large white Arctic wolverine. Tiny snowy Arctic polar bison.
Tiny snowy Arctic musk ox.